Former head of Exxon Mobil, Rex Tillerson, had his the first day of his confirmation hearing in the Senate today. And as with other high-profile nominees, it was a contentious event. And not just in his conversations with Democrats. Republicans got a bit feisty with him as well. So we're going to have for you a couple different things. We've got Marco Rubio pressing Rex Tillerson hardcore on various aspects of Russia and its government. And then also an interesting investigation closed out about a week ago in some of ExxonMobil's business dealings with state sponsors of terrorism during Rex Tillerson's tenure as a senior executive. So we'll get to that in just a little bit. We're going to start off with some of Marco Rubio, who was tough in his questioning.
Is Vladimir Putin a war criminal?
I would not use that term.
Well, let me describe the situation in Aleppo, and perhaps that will help you reach that conclusion. In Aleppo, Mr. Putin has directed his military to conduct a devastating campaign. He's targeted schools, markets, not just assisted the Syrians in doing it. His military has targeted schools and markets and other civilian infrastructure. It's resulted in the death of thousands of civilians. This is not the first time Mr. Putin is involved in campaigns of this kind. Back when he was just appointed prime minister before he was elected, and I'm sure you're aware of that period of time, there was a series of bombings, and they blamed it on the Chechens. And Mr. Putin personally said that he would punish them, and so he ordered the Air Force to bomb the Chechen capital of Grozny. They used Scud missiles to hit hospitals, the city's main outdoor market, packed with shoppers. 137 people died instantly. They used thermobaric and fuel-air explosive bombs. These are the bombs that ignite, and they burn the air breathed in by people who are hiding in basements. They used cluster munitions. He used battlefield weapons against civilians. And when it was all said and done, an estimated 300,000 civilians were killed. So, based on all this information and what's publicly in the record about what's happened in Aleppo and the Russian military, you are still not prepared to say that Vladimir Putin and his military have violated the rules of war and have conducted war crimes in Aleppo.
Now, those are very, very serious charges to make, and I would want to have much more information before reaching a conclusion. I understand there is a body of record in the public domain. I'm sure there's a body of record in the classified domain. And I think in order to deal with a serious question like this,
Mr. Tillerson, what's happened in Aleppo is in the public domain. The videos and the pictures are there.
Fully informed before advising the president.
Now, normally I would question whether he actually doesn't know about those things. It seems like a sort of crazy thing, like everybody's following what happened in Syria, but I almost trust him, and this is one of the dangers that you face when you nominate someone to be the head of the diplomatic efforts of the United States who has no experience whatsoever in international diplomacy outside of personal business dealings with an oil company. He might literally not know what's been going on in Syria.
Yeah,
and with Trump as the president, I would like to have an expert as the Secretary of State.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I don't know what's worse, whether he knows or doesn't know. But Vladimir Putin has a long record of potential war crimes, right? And the international courts have wanted to deal with it, and it's a little difficult to do so when you have both Syria and Russia refusing to play ball with investigations and things like that. But again, I think Marco Rubio did a really good job in outlining some of the major accusations against Russia and its military, deliberate attacks on civilians in Syria. There was also starvation and torture used as a tool for punishment. Chemical weapons were used. So these are all huge issues. And why would it be difficult for someone like Rex Tillerson to say that Vladimir Putin is guilty of war crimes after he's been informed of what's in the public record? Yeah. Why? Is there any reason?
It might be past business dealings, perhaps. Something about a $500 billion contract that got canceled but might be brought back up at any time. Now, look, at other points during the hearing, he was a little bit harder on some of the things that Putin and Russia have done. And that's a product of Marco Rubio and others questioning him. By the way, a little bit of credit to Marco Rubio. I wish he had been talking about civilian casualties during the Republican primary with this much enthusiasm. He wasn't at that point. And many people, especially the big libs in the audience, are going to be saying, well, don't other countries use those sorts of munitions, including the U.S.? Yes. We commit war crimes, and we admit that all the time. We use thermobaric weapons and formerly white phosphorus and cluster munitions. We even sell them to other countries. And so I don't think there's hypocrisy, at least coming out of us on that.
Well, look,
we do those same things and should stop.
Absolutely, and we're also allies with countries that do similar questionable things. So
exactly. So on another potential issue with Vladimir Putin and his treatment of political opponents and journalists, You'll see that here.
Mr. Tillerson, do you believe that Vladimir Putin and his cronies are responsible for ordering the murder of countless dissidents, journalists, and political opponents?
I do not have sufficient information to make that claim.
Are you aware that people who oppose Vladimir Putin wind up dead all over the world, poisoned, shot in the back of the head? And do you think that was coincidental, or do you think that it is quite possible, or likely, as I believe, that they were part of an effort to murder his political opponents?
Well, people who speak up for freedom in regimes that are repressive are often at threat, and these things happen to them.
Oh, okay.
I guess that's his way of having empathy. It sounds a bit dismissive to journalists being killed in authoritarian regimes.
I just want...
These things happen, Anna.
Yeah, I just want the American people to put everything, all of these different pieces together. So you have Donald Trump, who will be the commander-in-chief, who does not trust our intelligence organizations whatsoever. He believes that they've become too politicized. He doesn't trust them. Then you have Rex Tillerson, who doesn't seem to know much about Russia's war crimes, being named our Secretary of State. I just feel like we're kind of headed toward a recipe for disaster when it comes to an issue that a lot of voters, especially on the right, claim they care a lot about, and that's the issue of national security.
Yeah.
So I don't know how this is going to play out. I do like that these tough questions are being asked, especially by someone like Marco Rubio. I mean, credit to him for not being a so-called boy in this case, which is something that Trump would insult him with quite a bit during the primaries. But I'm curious to see if it leads to anything.
Yeah.
Because Secretary of State is an important position.
Yeah.
And making sure our president trusts intelligence and doesn't just brush them off because he thinks that they're politicized and he's paranoid about them is also important. So those are my worries.
Yeah, and look, I have a bunch of worries. I mean, look, we don't nominate secretaries of state who don't have international experience in diplomacy. You're supposed to have that. This is actually a historical move that Trump has made. And you combine it with the fact that they've done a blanket dismissal of all the ambassadors. Now, generally, most of the ambassadors get replaced when a new regime comes in. But to say we're going to bring in a guy who, aside from business dealings with some states on the behalf of Exxon Mobil, has no apparent network around the world, which is what a potential Secretary of State is supposed to bring, in part, we're also going to get rid of all the people with the experience in those countries. That is a recipe for disaster. And outside of our worries about his business dealings with Russia, that gigantic $500 billion deal that he was going to do, other than that as a potential reason to choose him, I have not heard another one. Why he would be picked out of everyone else. I haven't heard a conservative make that case. I haven't heard a progressive make that case. And that is bizarre. Now, these are reasons why a progressive might be opposed to him. There are also reasons why conservatives might have a problem with Rex Tillerson, and that is that Exxon Mobil, about a decade ago and in the years preceding, conducted business with states that were on the list for state sponsors of terrorism. Filings came out from 2006 show that Exxon Mobil had $53.2 million in sales to Iran, $600,000 in sales to South Sudan, and $1.1 million in sales to Syria during the 3 years between 2001 and 2004. He became a senior vice president at ExxonMobil back in 2001, president and director in 2004, and eventually chairman and chief executive. So at the times that they were doing those business dealings with state sponsors of terror, he was one of the most highly placed executives in ExxonMobil. Now, ExxonMobil didn't actually break the law in doing that because they used a widely used and known loophole at that time where a European-based subsidiary conducted the business dealings for them. And their rationale for why we shouldn't consider this to be a problem, and by the way, that loophole was eventually plugged because people understood what it was being used for. They said this is former ExxonMobil Assistant General Counsel Richard Gutman, who said, compared to Exxon's overall annual revenue of $371 billion, these transactions are not material by any reasonable measure. And that's what makes it so amazing, is they're saying we shouldn't worry about this because, yes, we funded Iran and Syria, but it was a small amount of money. That doesn't make it better, that makes it worse. You were willing to do business dealings with Iran and Syria, even though it wasn't a lot of money.
Right.
It's an incomprehensibly small amount of money compared to what ExxonMobil does, and you were still willing to skirt the intent of the law, if not the letter of it, so that you could make that money. Which reminds me, at least, of Donald Trump's ethical problems.
If you want to see this happen, donate $3, $20, $27, whatever you can afford. You know that if everybody that's watching this video donated right now, we could stop the fundraising because we'd have enough. So go to tytnetwork.com/go. We'll wait while you make the donation. Thank you for doing it and for building a great new journalism team. And thanks for watching.